I want to tell you all about a story about a young man I know. We'll call him Calvin. I facilitate therapeutic boys basketball groups in the juvenile justice setting, and I met him in my group. One day, towards the end of our group, he learned that somebody intentionally put hot sauce on his hoodie. Wow. Well, he learned about this, and this was at the end of our group, and he stood up, and he walked out of the group. And this moment played in my mind in slow motion. I thought to myself, this is where a fight breaks out. This is where staff have to intervene and break it up. This is where paperwork gets written, and this is where trajectory deepens. He locates the young man, he locates his hoodie, he picks it up, he sees that there's hot sauce on it, and he asks the young man a simple question. Did you put hot sauce on my hoodie? The other person confirmed, but what happened next truly surprised me. He looked at him and said, "You need to clean this up," and place it on the table. I was surprised. And in that moment, when he handed him the hoodie and put it on the table, he could have had a bunch of different reactions. He could have said, "When I see you, I'm going to take you outside," or "It's on site," or "I'm about to crash out." But instead, he said, "You need to clean this up." And this moment is significant because he decided to choose agency. This is a moment where he could have made a poor choice, but given the context, he was able to exert control and influence what happens next in ways that serve him. I'm going to get back to Calvin's story, but when I tell you something ironic about who I am, I'm a therapist. I am a talk therapist. I see young people every single day in my office. I believe in the power of talk therapy, but I also know it's not the only way. In fact, research tells us that healing can happen through multiple structured forms of support. I've seen this when therapy meets movement, when therapy meets action, when therapy meets rhythm, because oftentimes healing doesn't start with talking. It can begin with feeling capable. And this resonates with me because as a young person, I didn't always get that feeling, especially in schools. As a young person, I went to Chicago Public Schools, and I had this beautiful experience of my racial identity being reverberated back to me in the culture. We had Black icons, Black educators. And at the same time, I experienced harm for that identity at the intersection of low expectations and disregard. My parents were confused. My parents are Jamaican. Education is the only way. And prior to elementary school, I was doing fine. Out of concern and love, they doubled down on support, on high expectations. And I understand now what they were doing, but at the time, it just felt like more pressure on a nervous system that was trying to figure it out. I didn't really know what to do, but until my body found a solution. Basketball. Every single day after school, I would race home. Me and my brother, I would toss my book bag on the floor, head out the door to my next door neighbor's house and ask them a simple question. "Can I use your hoop in the backyard?" Most times they said yes. And I didn't know it at the time, but basketball was doing something for my body that language could not provide. When I was out there, I could move, I could dribble, I could create. And you have to remember that this is Chicago. This is the 90s. This is when the Bulls were on fire, right? Michael Jordan was literally a generational talent. He taught us how to fly. I took that to heart. And when I was out there, I would dribble, I would shoot, Sometimes I would miss, but then I would adjust, I would shoot and make it, and that was feedback. The experience that I can try something and make an adjustment based off of information that was right in front of me. I continued this day after day. I would come home and knock on their door, and I realized another thing. My ball handling skills were getting better. I was losing the ball far less often, and my shot became more accurate. I was experiencing mastery. The experience of seeing my efforts produce visible and measurable change in my life for the better. This combination of mastery and feedback began to transform the way I thought and felt about myself from the inside out. This is cognitive behavioral therapy in real time. Change how you think and feel about yourself through thoughts and feelings and action. But I didn't need somebody to tell me this. This was happening implicitly because my body could move. We know this instinctually. Think about having an important conversation with a friend while going for a walk. Now think about that same conversation while sitting across from them on the couch. Movement fundamentally changes the conversation. Trauma researchers tell us this, that the body carries stories and unresolved trauma and unresolved stress. And for me, basketball was doing a lot for my body. I was jumping, I was sweating, I was moving, I was releasing stress. And again, this continuous process of movement and agency and feedback and release told me something very important. That my body and actions can influence what happens next. And I want to make something very clear. I had access. I was fortunate enough to be born into a family that had resources and access to safe communities, basketball courts, trusted adults that loved me unconditionally. And we know one thing is true. Access to safety is unequal, particularly at the intersection of race and class. Courts disappear, community centers go underfunded, parks shutter. But the one institution that remains, and we all know well, are schools. Schools, especially those serving predominantly Black and brown communities, have been and can be sites of healing and liberation. But too often, we organize schools around prediction. We track behavior. We track attendance. We track grades. We build entire tracking apparatuses to predict who will fail. And if you are a Black and brown boy, those numbers are devastating. One thing that we know is true is that schools can be sites of healing. And that was true for our good friend in the beginning of the story, Calvin. You see, right before that moment with the hoodie, in our therapeutic basketball boys group, we worked on a simple skill. We sat in a circle, we talked about it, we processed, we thought through scenarios, and then we took it to the basketball court. This skill that we worked on was important because it was going to help us make decisions in real time. We printed out a credit card size laminate of this skill, and each participant put it in their sock. And the instructions we gave them were, if you feel yourself speeding up, if you feel yourself having a moment where harm may occur, well, stop the game, you look at that card, and you make a different choice. The acronym on that card was STOP, S-T-O-P. Stop what you're doing, take a deep breath, observe your thoughts and feelings, and proceed with calm. He had an opportunity to work on this in a structured way with peers who wanted to see him do well and adults who supported him through coaching. You see, Calvin didn't become a different person in that moment. He experienced agency. And what that did for him was that it allowed him to protect his dignity without losing everything. This is what I mean when we talk about regulating systems. But the question that I have in my mind is, what would happen if we intentionally designed schools this way? Every school that I've ever been a part of, from the south side of Chicago to Kalamazoo, Michigan, has prioritized and protected the basketball court. We know fundamentally that this is a place where boys can regulate and calm themselves. But what if we build this out intentionally? What if we created regulating systems? This would require investment in resources, policies, and from schools to shift from prediction to regulation. This is important because in that moment, when Calvin chose agency, what we worked on didn't erase the environment. It just expanded the choices inside of his body. And I recognize myself in Calvin because in school, like I mentioned earlier, I was a boy who had to hide in plain sight. I learned that it was more important to be polite and to pretend to be attuned as opposed to risk being curious. There's many young people that you won't hear about today in this talk. Part of their stories haven't been heard and won't be heard because they were predicted before they were ever understood. And they grew up in communities oversaturated by disinvestment and over-policing. Some of them are no longer with us. And I hold them close. I carry them with me every time I step into a classroom, every time I step onto a basketball court. And I remember that that was their outcome, but it didn't have to be that way. They were not destined for this. They were born into this because access to safety, access to regulation, access to healing was uneven. Every black and brown boy deserves to feel inside of their body that they are capable and worthy.